Hello, dear viewers of the Fear Files channel. Today we will dive into one of the most mysterious and frightening aviation disasters of modern times, the disappearance of Flight MH370. This story began on the night of March 8th, 2014, and still has no definitive answer. 239 people disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only fragments of a mystery that the world has been trying to solve for more than 10 years. Get comfortable, because what you are about to hear will make you doubt how much we really know about the sky above our heads. On March 8th, 2014, a Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777-200ER departed from Kuala Lumpur for Beijing. It was a routine night flight of the kind performed thousands of times every day around the world. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. Among the passengers were families, tourists, business people, ordinary people who planned to be in the Chinese capital in a few hours. None of them could imagine that their names would go down in history as one of aviation's greatest mysteries. The flight commander was 53-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah, an experienced pilot with 18,000 flight hours. His co-pilot was 27-year-old Farik Abdul Hamid, who was making his first flight on a Boeing 777 without an instructor. The plane took off at 0:41 local time. The weather was good. All systems were operating normally. It seemed that this would be the most ordinary flight out of thousands like it. At 1:01, Flight MH370 established last voice contact with Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control. Co-pilot Farik uttered the standard phrase, "Good night, Malaysia 370." His voice was calm, without any signs of alarm or problems. These were the last words heard from the aircraft. A minute later, the aircraft's transponder, a device that transmits data about the location, altitude, and identification of the aircraft, suddenly stopped working. Flight MH370 disappeared from civilian radar screens. At that moment, dispatchers did not immediately raise the alarm. Sometimes contact with aircraft is temporarily lost for technical reasons, and they reappear on the radar screens of neighboring air traffic control services. But when the plane was supposed to enter the area of responsibility of Vietnamese dispatchers, it wasn't there. The Vietnamese contacted their Malaysian colleagues, who attempted to establish contact with the flight, unsuccessfully. Some time passed before everyone realized the terrible truth. A Boeing 777 with 239 people on board had disappeared. When dawn broke on March 8th, a large-scale search and rescue operation began. Initially, all efforts were concentrated on the South China Sea, in the area between Malaysia and Vietnam, where the plane was last seen on radar. Military and civilian services from several countries joined the search. Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Singapore, Thailand, the USA, Australia. Ships and planes combed huge sections of sea, but found nothing. No debris, no oil slicks, no emergency beacon signals, nothing that would indicate the crash site. Relatives of the passengers gathered at the airports of Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, waiting for news. Their hopes melted away with each passing hour. Media around the world broadcast news of the plane's disappearance nonstop. Rumors about found debris, about signals from the aircraft, about any signs of the plane appeared and were immediately refuted. But days passed, and there were no traces of the Boeing 777. And then the Malaysian military made a shocking statement that turned the entire investigation upside down. It turned out that after disappearing from civilian radars, the plane continued to fly. Military radars detected an unidentified object that turned around and flew back across the Malay Peninsula crossed the country from east to west, and headed toward the Andaman Sea. The military did not raise the alarm at that moment because they did not identify the object as a missing passenger plane. They thought it might be a military aircraft performing maneuvers. This admission was devastating. All searches were being conducted in the wrong place. The plane had not fallen into the South China Sea immediately after disappearing from radar. It flew for several more hours. But where? And most importantly, why? Why did a passenger plane with 239 people on board suddenly turn around, turn off all communication systems, and fly in an unknown direction? These questions gave rise to countless theories that continue to appear to this day. The next important information came from the British company Inmarsat, which provides satellite communications for aviation. It turned out that the SATCOM communication system on board MH370 continued to automatically exchange signals with their satellite even after the plane disappeared from radar. These signals, so-called handshakes, did not contain location data, but Inmarsat engineers were able to analyze them using the Doppler effect and signal travel time. Analysis showed that the last handshake was recorded at 8:19 in the morning, more than 7 hours after takeoff. By this point, the plane should have long since run out of fuel and fallen into the ocean. Data from the satellite indicated two possible trajectories: a northern corridor that passed through Central Asia and a southern corridor going into the Indian Ocean. The northern route was quickly ruled out. Too many countries with developed air defense systems were located along this path, and no one detected an unidentified aircraft. The southern corridor remained. Mathematical calculations indicated that the Boeing 777 fell somewhere in the southern part of the Indian Ocean, in one of the most remote and deep places on Earth. This was a real nightmare for search services. We were talking about a gigantic water area of thousands of square kilometers, with depths of up to 4 to 5 kilometers, where such search operations had never been conducted before. But there was no other choice. The search operation moved to the Indian Ocean. In the spring of 2014, one of the most large-scale and expensive search operations in aviation history began. Australia took on the coordination of international efforts. Special oceanographic vessels equipped with the most modern equipment for deep-sea scanning joined the search. Autonomous underwater vehicles descended to kilometer depths, scanning the ocean floor with sonars. They were looking for characteristic traces of the crash: fuselage debris, engines, any large objects that could be the remains of the Boeing 777. The work was exhaustingly slow. Underwater vehicles moved at walking speed, methodically combing through square kilometer after square kilometer. The weather in this part of the Indian Ocean is notorious for storms and high waves, which regularly interrupted search operations. Months turned into years. The search area expanded, but there were no results. Strange objects were found on the bottom: old sunken ships, geological formations, even underwater volcanoes, but not a single fragment of MH370. In January 2017, after 3 years of unsuccessful searches and expenses of more than $150 million, the official search operation was suspended. About 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor had been scanned, but the main crash site was never found. This was an unprecedented failure. Never before in modern aviation history had a large passenger aircraft disappeared so completely without a trace. But the story didn't end there. The ocean began to give up debris. In July 2015, on Réunion Island in the Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the supposed crash site, a plane wing was found. More precisely, a flaperon, part of the trailing edge of the wing that is used to control the aircraft. The find was discovered by locals cleaning up trash on a beach. The flaperon was covered with barnacles, indicating a long stay in the water. It was sent for examination to France. Experts confirmed this is debris from flight MH370. The serial numbers on the parts exactly matched the missing Boeing 777. Finally, there was physical proof that the plane had indeed fallen into the Indian Ocean. But there were even more questions. How did the debris travel such a huge distance? Ocean currents in the Indian Ocean could indeed have brought debris from the crash site to Réunion, but this meant that the plane fell even further west than originally assumed. After the find on Réunion, systematic searches for debris on the coasts of Africa and islands of the Indian Ocean began, and they began to appear one after another. In Mozambique, parts of the interior lining were found. In South Africa, engine fragments. In Madagascar, parts of the wing and cabin. Over several years, more than 30 pieces of debris were found, which were identified with varying degrees of certainty as parts of MH370. Each piece of debris was carefully studied by experts. They looked for traces of explosion, fire, impacts, any clues that could explain what happened to the plane. Some fragments showed signs of damage consistent with a high-speed impact with water. But definitive conclusions about the cause of the disaster could not be made. The debris told that the plane was destroyed, but did not explain why and how it ended up at that point in the ocean. Analysis of barnacles and algae on the debris helped scientists clarify the possible crash site. Biologists identified species of organisms and the conditions in which they could grow, which gave additional clues about ocean currents and the possible drift trajectory of debris. Computer modeling of drift, based on the found fragments, indicated several new zones for searches, but they were never fully explored. Now let's talk about the most terrible thing, about what could have happened on board flight MH370 on that fateful night. The official investigation considered many versions, but was never able to reach a final conclusion. Let's examine the main theories, from the most plausible to the most fantastical. The first, and one of the most discussed theories, is deliberate actions by the pilot. Flight Commander Zahari Ahmad Shah became the subject of close attention from investigators. A homemade flight simulator was found in his home, on which he spent a lot of time. Experts analyzed the simulator's hard drive and discovered that shortly before the fateful flight, Zahari practiced a route strikingly similar to the supposed trajectory of MH370, a flight across the Malay Peninsula and then into the southern part of the Indian Ocean until complete fuel exhaustion. This finding gave rise to a dark theory. Perhaps Zahari intentionally hijacked his own plane to commit suicide, taking 238 innocent people with him. He had personal problems. His marriage was falling apart. There were political disappointments. On the day of departure, there was a trial of Malaysian politician Anwar Ibrahim, whom Zahari supported, and the verdict was unfavorable. Could this have been the last straw? According to this theory, Zahari waited for the moment of transfer of control from Malaysian dispatchers to Vietnamese. It was precisely in this short time interval that the transponder was turned off. Then he could have turned off the ACAR system, which automatically transmits data about the state of the aircraft, turned the plane around, and directed it back. He knew where the blind spots of military radars were, and could have used this knowledge. Perhaps he somehow incapacitated the co-pilot, sent him into the cabin under some pretext, and locked the cockpit door. Then he could have depressurized the cabin, which would have led to loss of consciousness of everyone on board from hypoxia, while he himself breathed through an oxygen mask. After that, he could fly for hours until the plane ran out of fuel somewhere over the most remote part of the Indian Ocean, where the chances of finding debris were minimal. This theory is terrible in its logic, but there is a problem. There is no direct evidence. The simulator only shows that the pilot practiced various scenarios, which many aviation enthusiasts do. Friends and colleagues of Zahari described him as a balanced professional, a loving father and grandfather. Psychological profiles did not reveal signs of suicidal tendencies. But on the other hand, many pilots who committed similar actions in the past also seemed like normal people until the very end. Remember Germanwings Flight 9525, when the co-pilot deliberately crashed the plane into a mountain, killing 150 people. Or Egyptair Flight 990, where the pilot possibly deliberately directed the plane into the ocean. The second version is the actions of hijackers or terrorists. On board MH370 were two passengers traveling on stolen passports, Iranians trying to legally get to Europe. Initially, this raised suspicions, but the investigation showed that they had no connections with terrorist groups and were simply seeking a better life. Nevertheless, the theory of aircraft hijacking remains. Perhaps there was someone on board who was able to break into the pilot's cabin and take control, but why then fly for hours to nowhere, making no demands? Usually terrorists want attention, want to convey their message. Here, complete silence. The third version is catastrophic equipment failure or fire on board. Perhaps something happened that disabled the aircraft's electronics, including communication systems. The pilots could have turned the plane around, trying to make an emergency return to the nearest airport, but then lost control or themselves lost consciousness due to smoke or depressurization. The plane continued to fly on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. This version explains the turn in silence, but there are questions. Why were there no emergency signals? Why did the plane fly on such a strange route? And most importantly, analysis of the debris did not reveal unambiguous signs of fire. There's also a version about penetration into the aircraft's electronic systems, a so-called cyber-terrorist act. The Boeing 777 is a modern aircraft with many computer systems. Theoretically, if someone was able to gain access to these systems, they could hijack control. But aviation security experts claim that critical flight control systems are physically isolated from systems accessible to passengers, and hacking them from outside is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Among the more exotic theories is the version that the plane was accidentally shot down during military exercises, and then this was covered up. Military exercises of several countries were indeed being conducted in that area. Could a missile have accidentally hit a civilian aircraft, and then a large-scale cover-up operation began? Supporters of this theory point to oddities in the behavior of authorities, contradictory statements, delays in providing information. But again, there is no direct evidence. Conspiracy theorists went even further. Some claim that the plane was hijacked for valuable cargo or VIP passengers. Specialists in the field of microelectronics were supposedly on board, and in the cargo hold, secret technologies. The plane was supposedly secretly landed at some remote base, and the entire search operation is a cover-up. Others talk about alien abduction, time anomalies, flights into parallel dimensions. These theories do not deserve serious discussion, but they show how deeply this tragedy touched the collective consciousness. The Malaysian government headed the official investigation, inviting experts from many countries. In January 2015, Flight MH370 was officially recognized as an aviation disaster, everyone on board dead. This was necessary for legal procedures and payment of compensation to families. But for relatives, this was another blow. How can you declare people dead when there are no bodies, no exact crash site? In July 2018, a final investigation report was published, a document of almost 500 pages. The conclusion was shocking in its uncertainty. The cause of the aircraft's disappearance cannot be established with certainty. The investigation found no malfunctions that could have led to the disaster. The cargo was checked, nothing dangerous. Passengers were checked, no connections to terrorist groups. The crew was checked, professionals without complaints. The report confirmed that the plane was intentionally diverted from its course, but could not determine who exactly did this and why. The shutdown of communication systems suggested intentional actions, but whose exactly remained a mystery. The last data from the satellite indicated that the plane was descending at high speed, which may correspond to a fall after fuel exhaustion or intentional diving. Relatives of the victims were outraged. They accused the Malaysian authorities of concealing information, of incompetence, of premature termination of searches. Some families united and raised funds for private search operations. The American company Ocean Infinity in 2018 conducted a new search campaign using the most modern technologies in autonomous underwater vehicles. They scanned another 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, but again found nothing. Behind all the theories, investigations, and technical details, it's easy to forget the main thing about the 239 real people who disappeared that night. Each of them had their own story, their own dreams, their own loved ones who still cannot find peace. Among the passengers were 23 people from a group of artists returning from an exhibition in China. There were newlyweds who spent their honeymoon in Malaysia. There were children flying with their parents. 153 passengers were citizens of China, and their families staged numerous protests demanding the truth and continuation of searches. The Chinese government put pressure on Malaysia, demanding answers. Relatives created support groups, spent years together in agonizing waiting for news. Some refused to believe that their loved ones were dead, clinging to any possibility that somewhere, somehow, they could have survived. Psychologists say that the absence of bodies and a crash site makes the grieving process incredibly difficult. This is called ambiguous loss, a state when there is neither confirmation of death nor the possibility of maintaining hope. For the crew families, the situation was especially painful. The wife and children of Commander Zahari were subjected to bullying and accusations. They lost a loved one and simultaneously faced suspicions that he could have been a mass murderer. The family of co-pilot Farrick experienced a similar nightmare. The young man was just starting his career, was on the verge of marriage, and all this was cut short in one moment, leaving behind only questions without answers. The disappearance of MH370 led to serious changes in the aviation industry. How is such a thing even possible in the 21st century, in an era of GPS and satellite technologies, for a huge plane to disappear without a trace? This question forced the international aviation community to reconsider many procedures. A new aircraft tracking system was introduced, Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, which requires aircraft to transmit their position every 15 minutes. In case of distress, the interval is reduced to 1 minute. This will not allow an aircraft to disappear for several hours, as happened with MH370. manufacturers began developing systems for automatic deployment of emergency beacons when crashing into water. Black boxes received increased range of underwater beacons and increased battery life. The possibility of streaming data from aircraft to ground stations in real time is being discussed, so that flight information is preserved even if the black boxes are lost. Cockpit security protocols were revised. After the Germanwings tragedy, where the co-pilot locked himself in the cockpit and deliberately crashed the plane, many airlines introduced a rule that at least two people must always be in the cockpit. If one pilot leaves, their place is taken by a crew member. But all these measures do not answer the main question: what happened to MH370? And could any of this have prevented the tragedy? In recent years, new technologies have appeared that give hope for the possible discovery of the crash site. The private company Ocean Infinity proposed in 2024 to conduct a new search operation, using even more advanced autonomous underwater vehicles and artificial intelligence for analyzing ocean floor scanning data. They are ready to work on a no-find, no-fee basis. If they don't find the plane, they won't take money. New studies of debris drift, based on more accurate models of ocean currents and data on actually found fragments, indicate several promising zones for searches that were not previously explored. Scientists from different countries continue to analyze all available data, hoping to find the key to the solution. There are also attempts to use artificial intelligence to analyze all data about the flight, from radar recordings to witness testimonies, from debris analysis to studying the personalities of everyone who was on board. Perhaps in the array of information, there is a pattern that the human mind cannot see, but which machine learning will be able to detect. Some researchers propose a radically new approach. Instead of searching on the ocean floor, focus on more thorough analysis of already found debris. Modern technologies allow extracting much more information from them than was possible several years ago. Microscopic analysis of damage, study of microorganisms on the surface, geochemical analysis of deposits. All this can give clues about where exactly the debris was in the ocean, at what depth, how long. By putting this data together, one can build a more accurate map of the possible crash site. There have even been proposals to use data from seismic stations. When a large object, like a Boeing 777, falls into the ocean from a great height, it creates a shock wave that can be detected by sensitive seismographs around the world. A group of researchers reviewed archival data from seismic stations for March 8, 2014, and claims to have discovered a weak signal that could correspond to the plane's fall. If this is indeed so, it could give a more precise time stamp of the moment of the crash and help narrow the search zone. Why did the disappearance of MH370 so capture the world's imagination? Aviation disasters, unfortunately, happen, but this story is special. It has everything that makes a mystery truly frightening: absence of answers, many contradictions, an element of the impossible. We live in a world of total surveillance, where our every step is tracked by cameras and satellites, where it's impossible to hide. And suddenly a huge plane with 239 people simply disappears. This destroys our sense of control over technologies and safety. Psychologists say that the human brain deals poorly with uncertainty. We want explanations, we want closure, we want the story to have an end. When this doesn't exist, we fill the gaps with theories, even the most incredible ones. This explains why so many conspiracy theories arose around MH370. Any theory, even absurd, seems better than a complete absence of answers. There is also an element of horror from the realization of one's own vulnerability. Each of us can be a passenger on a plane. We trust our lives to pilots, to technology, to security systems. The story of MH370 reminds us that this trust can be betrayed, that sometimes things happen that we cannot explain or prevent. This is an existential fear that resonates with everyone. MH370 is not the first case of mysterious disappearance of a vehicle, but definitely the most famous in the modern era. Aviation history knows several similar cases, although all of them occurred in earlier times when tracking technologies were primitive. In 1937, the legendary aviator Amelia Earhart disappeared during an attempt to make a round-the-world flight. Her plane disappeared somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, and despite decades of searches, the crash site has never been found. In 1945, a flight of 5 U.S. torpedo bombers disappeared during a training flight, the so-called Flight 19, which became part of the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. All 14 crew members disappeared without a trace. But those cases occurred in an era when there were no satellites, computers, global navigation systems. MH370 disappeared in 2014, when we have all this and much more. Therein lies the shock. Technologies should have made such disappearances impossible, but this did not happen. There are parallels with maritime disasters as well. The submarine Kursk sank in 2000, and it took time to find it on the bottom of the Barents Sea. The Argentine submarine San Juan disappeared in 2017 and was found only a year later at a depth of almost a kilometer. These cases show how difficult it is to search for something in the ocean, even when the search area is approximately known. With MH370, the situation is even more difficult. The search area is huge and depths reach 5 kilometers. Let's examine in more detail the technical aspects of what happened to the plane. The Boeing 777 is one of the most reliable aircraft in aviation history. Before the MH370 disaster, it was the safest twin-engine wide-body aircraft in operation. The probability of both engines failing simultaneously is negligible. The aircraft has many backup systems in case of any malfunctions. But something went wrong at 1:01 when the pilot uttered the last phrase, and at 1:21 when the plane appeared on military radar already turned around. In these 20 minutes, something critical happened. The transponder was turned off. This requires an intentional action. You need to move a switch in the pilot's cabin. The ACARS system stopped transmitting. This also requires deliberate shutdown. You need to know where the corresponding switches are located. After the turn, the plane flew west, crossed the Malay Peninsula, passed near Penang Island. Some witnesses on the ground reported seeing a low-flying plane that night, although these testimonies are contradictory. Then the plane headed northwest to the Andaman Sea. After that, military radars lost it from sight, but satellite data shows that somewhere in the area of northern Sumatra, the plane again changed course and headed south into the Indian Ocean. This route suggests that someone was controlling the plane, someone who knew the geography of the region and could maneuver between zones of radar coverage. Autopilot could execute the long flight south, but the initial maneuvers required manual control or reprogramming of autopilot. Analysis of data from the satellite showed another eerie detail. The plane flew smoothly at constant altitude and speed for several hours. This means that control systems were working normally. Fuel was being consumed systematically. There were no chaotic maneuvers that would indicate loss of control or struggle in the cabin. Just a long, smooth flight to nowhere. When the fuel ran out, one engine stalled first. This is normal. Tanks don't empty absolutely synchronously. The plane began to bank and lose altitude. A few minutes later, the second engine stalled. Without thrust, the Boeing 777 turns into a very inefficient glider. It could glide for some time, but ultimately should have entered a spin or steep dive. The last satellite signal shows a descent rate of about 15,000 feet per minute. This is a very rapid fall. The impact with water at such speed would have been catastrophic. The plane would have been destroyed into many fragments. But why then have so few pieces of debris been found? Part of the answer may be that large pieces, such as the fuselage and wings, sank almost immediately. What drifted were relatively light elements like skin panels, interior parts, insulation materials. Heavy components, engines, landing gear, main structures, lie on the ocean floor, possibly buried under bottom sediments. One of the most controversial aspects of the entire story is the actions of the Malaysian government and Malaysia Airlines. From the very beginning, information was provided contradictorily, with delays, sometimes inaccurately. For the first few days, authorities insisted that the plane was being searched for in the South China Sea, although the military already knew that it had turned back. This delay in disclosing information cost precious time. There were also oddities in how technical information was provided. Military radar data was not immediately made public. Information from Inmarsat was also released with a delay, and when it was published, many experts could not fully verify the calculations, as not all source data was provided. This gave rise to suspicions that something was being concealed. Malaysia Airlines was criticized for how the company communicated with relatives. Initially, they were informed that the plane had landed safely. Then, this information was refuted. Families learned news from the media before hearing from the airline. Compensation was paid slowly and with bureaucratic delays. All this added pain and frustration to an already unbearable situation. International relations also played a role. China, which lost the most citizens, demanded greater openness and more active searches. The USA provided technologies and experts, but some critics claim that America knows more than it says, thanks to its spy satellites and tracking systems. Australia coordinated searches in the Indian Ocean, investing huge resources, but ultimately never finding the plane. The disappearance of MH370 dealt a heavy blow to Malaysia Airlines. The company was already in a difficult financial situation, and this disaster worsened the situation. Many passengers began to avoid the airline. Trust was undermined. Then, just 4 months later, in July 2014, another Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777, Flight MH370, was shot down over Ukraine, taking the lives of all 298 people on board. 2 disasters in 1 year with one type of aircraft. This was a nightmare for reputation. As a result, Malaysia Airlines had to undergo complete restructuring. The company was essentially nationalized. Thousands of employees were laid off. The brand was relaunched. But the shadow of MH370 haunts the airline to this day. Each anniversary of the disappearance returns the story to the headlines, reminding of the unsolved tragedy. For the entire aviation industry, this was also a blow. The Boeing 777 was considered one of the safest aircraft, and its reputation suffered, although there was no evidence that the disaster occurred due to a technical malfunction. Insurance companies revised policies. Malaysia's tourism industry fell to decline. Economic consequences spread far beyond the immediate participants in the events. The story of MH370 MH370 became a global media sensation. In the first weeks after the disappearance, it was the main news story around the world. TV channels conducted round-the-clock coverage. Experts of all kinds expressed theories. Countless exclusive reports appeared. Some media showed irresponsibility, publishing unverified information, fake photographs of debris, sensational headlines. CNN became infamous for talking only about MH370 for weeks, sometimes putting forward completely fantastical theories. At one point, a host seriously discussed the possibility that the plane was swallowed by a black hole. This was an example of how the pursuit of ratings can lead to absurdity. Social media filled with conspiracy theories, fake news, manipulated images. Someone claimed to have seen the plane at a secret base. Others published mathematical proofs of various theories. Some used the tragedy for political purposes, accusing various governments of conspiracy. Relatives of victims begged the media to be more responsible, but sensationalism continued. The story also penetrated popular culture. Documentaries were created, books written, TV series filmed. Netflix released the documentary series MH370, the plane that disappeared in 2023, which again stirred up interest in the topic. Fictional works inspired by the tragedy appeared. Podcasts devoted entire seasons to analyzing theories. Each new work tried to find its own angle, its own explanation. But behind all this media noise, it's easy to lose sight of the real people. For families of victims, each new article, each film, each discussion is a return of pain. Some relatives said they feel as if their grief is being exploited for the entertainment of the masses. This is an ethical dilemma. On one hand, public interest can help keep the case in focus and promote continuation of searches. On the other hand, there's a limit to how much one can turn tragedy into a spectacle. What can we take away from the tragedy of MH370? First, the obvious need to improve aircraft tracking systems. Technologies for this exist, but their implementation requires investment and international coordination. Streaming transmission of flight data to ground servers could guarantee that information is not lost even if the plane disappears. This is already technically possible. The question is in cost and the willingness of airlines to implement it. Second, more reliable security protocols are needed to prevent deliberate actions by pilots or other crew members. This is a complex problem because pilots need autonomy to make decisions in critical situations, but at the same time, precautions are needed against malicious use of this autonomy. Perhaps the solution is in biometric monitoring technologies of pilots' condition or in systems that can transfer control to the ground in extreme cases, although the latter raises concerns about cybersecurity. Third, international cooperation and transparency in investigations are necessary. Delays and contradictions in information provided by Malaysian authorities hindered searches and bred distrust. There should be clear protocols for immediate exchange of all relevant information between countries in case of such incidents. Fourth, deep-sea search technologies need to be developed. Most of the ocean floor remains unexplored. We know more about the surface of Mars than about the bottom of our oceans. Investment in oceanography and underwater technologies could help not only in searching for missing aircraft, but also in scientific research, climate study, discovery of mineral resources. The main question remains unanswered. Will the crash site of MH370 ever be found? Will we ever know for sure what happened that night? Optimists point out that technologies are constantly improving. What seemed impossible yesterday becomes real today. Air France Flight 447, which fell into the Atlantic in 2009, was found only after 2 years, but it was found. The black boxes were raised from the bottom. The investigation established the causes of the disaster. With MH370, the situation is more difficult due to the huge uncertainty of the crash site, but each piece of debris found, each new data analysis narrows the search zone. Perhaps in a year, in 5, in 10 years, a new expedition, armed with more advanced technologies, will finally find the debris on the ocean floor. We'll find the black boxes that will tell what was happening in the last minutes of the flight. And then families will finally get answers and be able to begin the real healing process. But there is also a pessimistic scenario. Perhaps the ocean will never give up its secret. Perhaps the debris is so destroyed and scattered that it's impossible to identify. Perhaps they are buried under meters of bottom sediments. Perhaps the black boxes are already destroyed by water pressure and time. In this case, MH370 will remain a mystery forever, a modern version of the story of the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship that disappeared without a trace. The story of MH370 raises deep philosophical questions about the nature of knowledge, control, and human vulnerability. We live in an era called the information age, when it seems that everything is known, everything is tracked, everything is controlled. But this tragedy shows the limits of our knowledge and control, shows that there are things that can escape all our technologies, all our security systems. This is a reminder that nature, in this case a huge, deep, dark ocean, can still keep secrets. That there are places on our planet where we cannot easily reach, where we are powerless. In an era when it seems that Google Earth shows every corner of Earth, when we send robots to Mars, the disappearance of a whole plane seems archaic, impossible. But it happened. There is also the question of trust. We trust technologies, trust pilots, trust systems, trust authorities. The story of MH370 shook this trust. It showed that systems can fail, that people can act unpredictably, that authorities can be incompetent or insincere. Restoring this trust requires not only technological improvements, but also cultural changes in how the aviation industry and governments communicate with the public. 10 years later, the disappearance of MH370 continues to have an impact. For families of victims, this is constant pain, an unhealing wound. Many of them became activists, fighting for improved aviation safety, for the rights of families of aviation disaster victims, for transparency of investigations. Their voices are important because they remind us that behind the technical details and theories stand real human lives and incredible suffering. For the aviation industry, MH370 became a catalyst for change. New technologies are being implemented, procedures are being revised, international cooperation is being strengthened. Perhaps these improvements will prevent similar tragedies in the future. In this sense, the victims of MH370 did not die in vain. Their tragedy makes flights safer for everyone else. For the general public, this is a story that doesn't let go. It touches something primal in our consciousness: fear of the unknown, fear of disappearance, existential anxiety in the face of the inexplicable. In a sense, MH370 became a symbol of all our modern fears: that technologies can let us down, that control is an illusion, that the world can be much more unpredictable and dangerous than we would like to think. After MH370, there were other incidents that raised similar questions, although not as mysterious. In 2018, Indonesian Lion Air Flight 610 fell into the Java Sea 13 minutes after takeoff, taking the lives of all 189 people on board. In 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed 6 minutes after takeoff. 157 people died. Both of these crashes were caused by a malfunction of the MCOS system on the Boeing 737 MAX, which led to a worldwide ban on operating this model. These tragedies differ from MH370 in that the causes were established quite quickly. Black boxes were found, data analyzed, culprits identified. Boeing was subjected to harsh criticism for concealing information about the MCOS system and insufficient pilot training. The company paid billions of dollars in compensation and fines. In a sense, these cases show how aviation disaster investigations should work: transparently, thoroughly, with clear conclusions and consequences. The absence of such certainty in the case of MH370 makes it even more frustrating. Families of victims did not receive closure. There are no culprits who can be held accountable. There is no clear lesson that can be learned and applied to prevent future disasters. There's only uncertainty, theories, and endless questions. Not everyone agrees with the official version of events. Not everyone agrees with the official version of events or with the direction of searches. A group of independent experts, including pilots, engineers, and researchers, put forward alternative theories about where the plane might be located. Some claim that the analysis of satellite data was erroneous, that mathematical models contained incorrect assumptions. They propose searching in other places. Some even insist that the plane could have landed somewhere, rather than falling into the ocean. Critics also point to inconsistencies in official statements. Why did military radars track the plane more accurately? Why wasn't the alarm raised earlier? Why was some data classified or provided with delays? These questions fuel suspicions about information concealment, although an alternative explanation may be simpler: bureaucratic incompetence and unwillingness to admit mistakes. There is also criticism of the search operations themselves. Some experts believe that they searched in the wrong places based on incorrect interpretation of data. Oceanographer David Griffin from Cairo in Australia conducted his own study of debris drift and came to the conclusion that they should have searched further north than where the main searches were conducted. His models show a different zone where the probability of finding debris is higher. But funding ran out, and this zone remained unexplored. An interesting aspect of the MH370 searches was the attempt to use crowdsourcing and social media. The company Digital Globe provided satellite images of the supposed crash areas, and thousands of volunteers around the world viewed them, trying to detect debris. This was an ambitious use of collective intelligence, but unfortunately did not lead to significant results. Too many false alarms, too difficult to distinguish debris from natural objects or ocean garbage in satellite images. In social networks, groups of enthusiasts formed who analyzed every detail, every fragment of information. Some of these amateur detectives made useful contributions, discovering contradictions in official data or suggesting new angles of view. Others went into conspiracy theories, creating complex theories based on disparate facts. This reflects a broader trend of the modern era: the democratization of information and investigations. No longer only official bodies conduct investigations. Ordinary people have access to data and tools for their own analysis. This can be positive, adding more eyes and minds to solving the problem, but it can also complicate the situation, adding noise and disinformation. For many people, the disappearance of MH370 became personal, even if they didn't know anyone on board. This is a story. 10 years have passed since that fateful night of March 8th, 2014, but the mystery of Flight MH370 remains unsolved. 239 people disappeared, leaving behind only questions, debris, and the inconsolable grief of loved ones. We live in an age of technology when it seems that everything can be tracked, everything can be found, but the ocean has proven that it is still capable of keeping its secrets. Perhaps one day we will find answers. Perhaps a new expedition, new technologies, a new breakthrough in data analysis will lead us to the crash site, to the black boxes, to the truth. Or perhaps this story will forever remain one of the greatest mysteries of our time, a reminder of the fragility of human life and the limits of our control over the world. For the families of victims, the search for truth continues. For the aviation industry, this is a lesson that led to important changes in safety. And for all of us, this is a story that doesn't let go, a story about how, in one moment, an ordinary flight turned into a nightmare, and how an entire plane can disappear as if dissolving into the night sky. Thank you for being with us on the Fear Files channel. Remember those who disappeared that night, and hope that someday the mystery of MH370 will finally be revealed.